this is Clinton from GrimmSpeed, and I'm going to be walking you through the installation of the GrimmSpeed Front Mount Intercooler on the 08 to 14 Subaru WRX and STI. The main part of this install will be on a 2008 STI, but we will also show the differences between WRX and STI installation. The first step for this install is going to be to pop the hood. This is our in-house shop car, so it has some of our parts already installed, like the GrimmSpeed radiator shroud, but we're going to need to take that off. So let's start by finding the 4 pop clips and 2 bolts and removing those. Once you have all those fasteners out, remove the radiator shroud. Now we're going to work on removing the OEM top mount intercooler. Start by removing the 2 12mm bolts for the bypass valve. Next, let's move on to the 2 12mm mounting bolts for the intercooler. We'll also have to remove the crossover pipe. There are 2 10mm bolts holding this on. The last step needed in order to take the OEM top mount intercooler out of the car is to loosen the worm clamps for the inlet and outlet of the intercooler. With those loosened, you should be able to wiggle the intercooler out of the engine bay. Now with that done, let's move to the underside of the car. The next step is to remove the OEM splash guard. Find these bolts and pull the splash guard down and set it aside. There are a couple of fasteners inside of the wheel well. You will need to remove those also. As with a lot of 08 to 14 Subarus, our bumper is held on with zip ties. With the car back on the ground, pop the bumper off. If your car is equipped with fog lights, remember to disconnect them. Now that the bumper's off, we can remove the OEM crash bar. Locate the 4 bolts on each side of the crash bar and remove them. The front of your vehicle should now look something like this. Our vehicle currently has the GrimmSpeed bro tie and hella horns installed. Let's remove those in order to make room for the front mount. Let's also flip this sensor around to the other side of its mounting bracket. Now it's time to prep the intercooler core for installation. Find the included mounting brackets and hardware and install them as shown here. The mounting brackets for the sides of the intercooler have small notches in them. Those notches point up. For now, leave the brackets a little loose. It'll be easier to fit the intercooler onto the car with a little bit of play. Using the same mounting hole and hardware that we used for the bro tie, line up the new front mount intercooler and screw it into place. The hardware that held on the OEM crash bar can now be used to secure the sides of the intercooler. Now let's move back into the engine bay. At this point, it's a good time to explain the differences between the STI and the WRX installation steps. For the most part, they're the same. The only differences are going to be the way that the pipes are designed to fit the throttle body and the turbo outlet on the WRX platform. Our WRX front mount kit comes with a bolt-on cast flange adapter and O-ring. Once that's bolted up, find the angled silicone coupler and install it on the flange. When it's seated correctly, it should look something like this. Next, take the GrimmSpeed branded pipe and insert the long end into the turbo outlet coupler. For the throttle body side, you want to take the 90-degree coupler and press it all the way down to the base of the throttle body. Find the pipe with the bypass flange on it and orientate it so the bypass flange is towards the top of the engine bay. Press the pipe into the coupler and line up the mounting points. Now you can mount your bypass valve with the OEM hardware. In order to clean up the bay a little bit and also make more room for installation of the new front mount piping, let's remove this bracket. Now let's take off the PCV hardline connections. These connections are held on by spring clamps, which can easily be removed with a pair of pliers. Once the clamps are removed, you can set the hardline aside. Now find all your silicone elbow couplers. Two of them should be the same, but one should have a slightly larger opening for the throttle body inlet. Find the appropriate sized worm clamps and slide them over the coupler. Firmly push the coupler over the throttle body, making sure that it slides all the way down to the base. Now it's time to install the first piece of piping that has the GrimmSpeed branding tag. This pipe will go on the top right side of the engine bay with the flange lining up with the bypass valve. Firmly install this pipe into the throttle body coupler. Once everything is installed correctly, the bracket should line up with the mounting holes and the flange should line up with the bypass valve. At this point, you can loosely install your hardware. Now we can go back to the throttle body coupler and tighten the worm clamp. Make sure that the worm clamp sits right below the bead on the inlet. Find the included gasket for the bypass valve, place it between each flange, and use the OEM hardware to tighten it down. In order to make room for the piping, we are going to need to remove the secondary air pump reservoir. There are two 10mm bolts holding this piece on. With those two bolts removed, you should be able to pull the reservoir off and up out of the engine bay. Your kit comes with a small black plug that you can press directly into the secondary air pump hole. Now let's fit the second pipe. In this orientation, slide the pipe up from underneath the car. Find your short coupler and worm clamps and attach the two pipes together. Now find the silicone couplers that have slightly different sized openings. Install the coupler onto the intercooler. Find the screw that holds the splash guard to the chassis. Now take your angled coupler and a worm clamp and install it on the pipe coming out underneath the car. Take one of the short piping pieces in your kit and install the short end into the intercooler. With this side of the kit pretty much all put together, all that's left to do is install this piece of nylon wrap to prevent rubbing and wear. Use the included zip ties to secure the wrap down. Go through and tighten all of your mounting points and silicone connections. Next, we will be tackling the turbo side. Find your 180-degree coupler and attach it to the turbo outlet. Make sure this one is properly seated as well. Grab your other worm clamp, place it on the top of the coupler, and then take your pipe, find the short coupler, and press it on. Then install the pipe as shown here. The next pipe is orientated with the bracket towards the bottom. It might take a little bit of maneuvering, but it should slide into place pretty easily. Find your two worm clamps, slide them over the coupler, and get them into place. This piece in the front mount kit is used on the mounting bracket on this pipe. The open side slides between the air intake mounting bracket and the chassis. Next, you can go through and tighten all of your coupler connections. And just a reminder, be sure to be tightening the worm clamp behind the bead, not in front or on top of it. Now we can assemble the piping the same way we did for the other side. Now that all of the piping is assembled and everything is put together, go back and make sure all of your connections are tight. We will need to cut spaces in the splash guard for the piping to fit through. Keeping the phrase, measure twice, cut once in your mind, use a shear or another cutting utensil to make these cuts. Now we need to route the new PCV hose. Follow the steps as shown here. The installation of your new GrimmSpeed Front Mount Intercooler is complete. If you decide to run our GrimmSpeed Front Mount Bash Bar, the installation for that is simple. Line up the bash bar with the OEM crash bar mounting holes, and use the OEM hardware to secure it in place. Most front mount intercoolers require you to cut sections of the bumper out in order to make room for the bigger core. We know this can be intimidating, but we tried to make this process as easy and straightforward as possible by providing a template for you to use when making your cutting lines. Simply take this template and a piece of cardboard and cut them out and tape them together so they look something like this. Then line the bottom of your bumper with painter's tape. Using a tape measure, measure a ½ inch forward from the center of the black piece of plastic. You will use this mark to make a straight line that is perpendicular to the center. Measure 8 inches to the left of center and then 8 inches to the right of center. This distance should be the same. Then do the same at 12 or 14 inches away. Now take your template, align it to the corner, making sure it's as straight up and down as possible. Take your marker and make your line. Use a ruler to connect the two lines together. Then follow the same steps for the other side. You should now have a straight line that goes all the way across. If you need to, double check your measurements. For the top inside of the bumper, we made our markings as easy as possible by following the cut rectangles in the trim. We now have our cut lines. We chose to use a Dremel with a cutting disc, but you can also use a very sharp razor blade to make your cuts. You're going to have to improvise a little bit by yourself on this one, but here we show you the best practices and how we got the bumper to fit correctly.